think that, oh, it is on. Great. Maybe I'll just leave it in. Hello, everyone. My name is Jason Bolte. I'm the director of the School of Music here at Montana State University. I just want to welcome you all to our second and final capstone and stepping stone concert of the year. Tonight, we're going to have, well, first off, I just want to introduce our two faculty that are here that have worked with all these students, as well as myself, is Dr. Linda Ontas at the mixing console, and Professor Cheyenne John Henderson over there. So the work you're going to see tonight is a majority of it. So four of the pieces, the works tonight are going to be senior capstone projects, and they vary. It's a really open-ended class in a lot of ways. The four tonight we're going to look at sound design. We're going to look at some music that's some experimental ambient music, as well as some recording material, as well as some podcasts. And it really is a great example of what our program and what our students do here in music technology. Our underclass students are also going to be presenting some material and some new works, mostly from sound synthesis and their MUST 125. Linda, what is the title of that class?
MIDI and electroacoustic composition.
Thank you. I thought that's what it was. It's been a while since I taught that one. So they're going to be presenting that work as well. So thanks all for coming, and we'll just go ahead and get started. So thank you.
Hello, everyone. I feel very short right now. Okay, that's better. I'm going to set up my computer and talk a little bit while that's setting up. But thank you all for coming out. I feel lucky that I get to kick this thing off. My name is McLean Daou, and I'm a senior graduating this next Friday. So a little bit of background on me. I'm from Austin, Texas. So I've had a lot of exposure to live music growing up, and it was one of the few times where I really got to enjoy the present moment. Felt like I understood my place in the world as I started learning guitar and writing music. Songwriting has been a passion of mine for a really long time. And in some cases, music was sort of like a form of medicine for me. So I originally went to school for STEM, and I learned pretty quickly that most of the fields of work that interested me were going to be incredibly competitive and male-dominated. Which was fine. I just knew I was going to have to work a lot harder to prove my skills, not only to my peers, but to myself. Ambience. So yeah, I knew I wanted to do something or create things that left a positive impact on the world, even if it was just a small audience that was listening to my music. All of my friends around me were becoming doctors or engineers. And I wanted to believe that whatever I made could have just as positive of an impact on the world as their hard work. So for this semester, my research endeavor was a way for me to reflect on my years here at MSU and why I even chose to pursue music in the first place. I've taken so many amazing classes here, especially this year. I'm in Buddhist traditions and poetry. I never thought I would have the opportunity to work with electrical engineers and build a guitar effects pedal. I never thought I would have the opportunity to work with so many talented instrumentalists and compose works for them that existed both in the realms of classical music and electronic. Never thought I'd have a chance to work with a graduate film student and score for a documentary, or work with computer science majors and compose and arrange a score for video games. So since enrolling at MSU, my dream of working in the music industry has become so much more multifaceted, which I think is perfect for me because I'm a pretty multi-passionate person. So mental health was also a huge focus of my research. It's also been a focus for me just as a musician. I'm embarking on this next chapter of my career. But I think that mental health is something that our world needs to take a little bit of a closer look. in terms of the roots of our ailments, whether they manifest themselves physically or mentally, extending to the larger context of like our lives, our daily habits, our bodies, and our communities. So for my thesis, I chose to examine the social disparities between music, religion, and medicine in Western culture, as well as ways that we've integrated music technology with traditional sound healing practices. So I think being a musician is an amazing way to combine multiple aspects of your life, including activism, creativity, healing, spirituality. The mystical aspect of music that I've always viewed is not something that I wanted to strive to understand completely, but I wanted to take a deep dive into the research that exists on how music is used to revolutionize the way we address mental health, as well as our understanding between sound and our physical well-being. I had the pleasure of working with a man named Brian Sparks, former Costco coworker. He's 71, he works full-time, but on the side he does Tibetan singing bowl meditation sessions in Livingston. He received his teachings from several monks and bowl masters from Nepal. He earned his blessing prayer through Tibetan flautist Nawang Kurchog, who was a direct disciple of the Dalai Lama for 9 years. He's a retired Presbyterian minister with a master's in theology, and his understanding of sound medicine was a holistic approach to the body and the interconnectedness of the mind and the body, and it was extremely eye-opening for me, and inspired a lot of my research. The singing bowls were thought to have originated from the Himalayas around 1,000 years ago, and they're a very important part of Tibetan Buddhist culture. They're used to purify the environment, to aid in meditation, enhance the energy of rituals, and the tones that are produced with the strike of a mallet typically show strong fundamental frequency presence as well as fourth or fifth partials. And this is kind of along the lines of the principle of Spanda, which is sort of a Brahmin tradition that explains how the universe, everything in the universe emanates a divine pulsation, considered to be like the central idea of life and creation itself. So various frequencies were associated with different body chakras. They carried specific benefits to specific organs. And we all know that psychosomatics and psychoacoustics in music all support the notion that sound is powerful beyond our emotional attachments and literal meaning, but for the subliminal sonic properties, the summation of sine waves and their individual signatures, which can create neural pathways in our impressionable minds. One example of this in Western classical music is the doctrine of affections, where different key signatures are used to convey certain emotions. Particularly for the relaxation effect, this is characterized by a decreased arousal of the sympathetic nervous system. So when you're listening to music, there's tons of neural operations happening at the same time, auditory processing, working memory, temporal sequencing, pitch tracking. So your mind is really active whenever you're listening to music. And so there's various meditations such as multimodal auditory beat stimulus or vibroacoustic therapy, which are proven methods that are effective in reducing somatic and cognitive states of anxiety. Usually these are characterized as having slower tempos, slower harmonic rhythms, subsonic frequencies, so these are frequencies that you aren't even really hearing, but they all have an effect on the body. They help to reduce respiration rate, heart rate, sweat production, body temperature, cortisol levels, blood pressure, inflammation, muscle tension, sensation to pain, increase in endorphins, melatonin, dopamine, oxytocin. The list just goes on. So I think that these findings, in conjunction with America's increasing rates of suicide, overall mental illness and chronic illness over the last few decades, brings to question the validity of our current approaches to health. Whether or not we've exhausted these non-traditional solutions that are potentially more accessible and effective in filling these healthcare gaps. There are lots of music therapies that are used for post-operative pain management and mitigating symptoms for chronic illness and disability like anxiety, depression, addiction, cardiac conditions, dementia, Alzheimer's, speech disorders, ADHD, stroke recovery, insomnia. I mean, the list goes on. PTSD and cancer is even in there, and that was Brian's specialty. He specifically worked with cancer patients. So one of my most interesting findings in my research was looking at how sound can transform the cognitive facilities into an audio pain reliever. And as well as the idea of entrainment, which is when your body matches the tempo of a stronger external pulse or a periodic force around you, so like a consistent rhythmic pattern. Many of these healing frequencies start below the range of hearing, and they create these subtle effects to your body on a micro level. Some of them can replicate brain waves, change the shapes of our cells, modulate the vagus nerve, harmonize the parasympathetic nervous system with all the organs in the body. I mean, there's just so much to look at whenever it comes to the power of sound on the body. Our bodies are malleable, and they mimic the abundance and variety of sound around us. So one thing I looked at too is sound pollution. Emphasis on higher frequencies is proven to have adverse effects on health, particularly for people with high blood pressure. There's a significant association between occupational and air traffic exposure with the rise of heart rate, BMI, adrenaline and epinephrine release, disruption of sleep cycle. These are all symptoms associated with anxiety disorders. And there's a growing need for cost-effective and simple anxiety treatments that are free from serious and unintended side effects, which are usually present in anti-anxiety medications such as SSRIs, SNRIs, and benzodiazepines. I can't say the word, but basically there's a need for a treatment that is less reliant on these psychologically addictive medications. And it was recommended by many of these studies, those who conducted these studies, that more work be done to further advocate for the efficacy of non-pharmaceuticals to improving quality of life. My paper specifically focused on solfeggio frequencies. It refers to a 6-tone scale. It's used in many forms of sacred music, including Gregorian chant. It was antiquated with the development of just intonation, but these are frequencies that imitate the summation of angles in sacred geometry, as well as cymatics. So each frequency has a specific meditative intention. If this shows, I don't know if it does. Yeah, thanks, Dr. Bolte. So this is a spectrogram example of, oh, I didn't even plug it in. Hilarious. 1 minute. Running on a lot of caffeine right now. Okay, cool. That is not what I'm seeing. That's kind of funny. That's hilarious. His screen looks different than that. Oh, there it goes. It created a double screen. Whoops. Okay, so this is a waveform of a strike with a Tibetan singing bowl. You normally see a waveform like this that has the fluctuation in amplitude. But I think in this specific example, it's really easy to see the beating effect caused by the strike. So usually the overtone series of the strike has multiple frequencies conflicting with each other to create the beating effect. And if we look at the spectrogram too, you can see that some of these frequencies are present well beyond the fundamental, especially up here. It's fascinating to me because most of these pitches are not in equal temperament tuning, but to a lot of people, they actually have more of a pleasant sound. This is a melodic spectrogram showing that other partial. And you can even see down here the subsonic frequencies that you wouldn't necessarily hear. And the beating effect is also pretty visible too. So yeah, for my creative project, I recorded an EP. One of the tracks was a meditation track, which uses one of the solfeggio frequencies, 285 hertz. It's believed that it's supposed to help with cell renewal, but I think mostly it's just good for purifying the mind. 285 hertz is somewhere between a D flat 4 and a D. So I kind of took my own liberty on that to create like a 3-minute long meditation piece. And yeah, that was my research. Thank you guys so much for listening. and I hope you guys enjoy the music. Definitely intend on making some more in the future that are longer, so this is just like a little sample. But I hope that my research allows people to really try and dig into the effects of the sound that goes on around them and really be mindful of how those sounds affect your physical and mental well-being. And I hope that more research in this area is done so that people can have more accessible methods of dealing with some of these ailments that they experience. So yeah, thank you so much.
I'm a freshman in the tech program. I just wanted to say something real quick about this piece. I want to thank Jake for playing this piece for me. It's for tuba and electronics. I'm really happy with how this came out. It's supposed to kind of make you feel uncomfortable. It's really eerie, kind of sci-fi score film based, so I hope you guys enjoy.
That's right.
Hello. My name is Drake Pinnell. I'm a junior here at Montana State University, Music Technology. I don't need my desktop up there, by the way. On the screen, I'm not going to use it. I can have the lights on, I'm just going to talk. Okay, cool. So I'm a junior here. This is my third year. I'm graduating next semester. I've always loved performing music and listening to music and going to shows and things like that. I think growing up, so I used to be like in high school band and orchestra. So I like played saxophone, violin. I went to like church services where everyone sang together, and I went to like scene rock shows where everyone's like screaming at each other and pushing each other around. So I got a lot of different types of music growing up. And I think what I learned is that music's really cool and it's for everybody and very diverse. Everyone can participate. And I think I really transfer that experience here. I think my education years taught me that too. When I originally went here, I wanted to make music for video games, but somehow I wound up working for the radio station. So that's kind of where my research project is about. So my research project is about public media in the United States. The thesis is if it has a future. So I started my research background talking about the Public Broadcasting Act of 1967, which established the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. Some of you may have heard that on the radio or television. So basically in other countries, the federal government will allocate tax money for the institution like the BBC in Britain. But in the United States, the federal government gives money to the CPB, which then gives money to all the member stations which already existed in the country. That's part of the reason it developed this way, is because we were a little late to the game. But it also gives all these stations a little more autonomy, so they get national programming like news and certain musical things, while also having to live up to a certain quality expectation. And they're also held to being very moderate in their political presentation of issues and the kinds of pundits they have. So this was done to ensure that the federal government wasn't directly funding the media, that it could operate on its own and be something that was truly free, that anyone can listen to. So because of this, there's not a lot of money that comes from the federal government to these stations, so they have to hold fund drives every year, usually a couple times a year, in order to get their funding, which has led them to become a lot more targeted in their audience in the United States than other countries. So in much of Western Europe, any taxpayer will spend roughly $100 to $170 a year on public media, whether or not they use it. But in the United States, each of us spends about $3 per person. So most of that money comes from these fund drives. And these stations have to compete with local commercial stations and different media outlets for listenership, which means they get very targeted in the demographic they appeal to, which in the case of the United States is usually very like moderately middle class to upper middle class, moderate Americans, which will someday die out. That's kind of the truth of it. So the audience is changing right now. So they've been, a lot of different stations and national companies have been trying to make efforts to diversify who they can get funding from. And one of the ways they've done that is with music. So music programming is usually done from different member stations, like KEXP in Seattle has a lot of great music programming, and then they send it out to other stations and they air it. And it's shifted a lot more towards like indie rock, like Vampire Weekend, Arcade Fire kind of bands, because a lot of the people who listen to that kind of music, 20 to 40-year-olds, usually are in the right kind of economic group to give money to radio stations. And while that's a good solution in the short term, it's basically a Band-Aid, because the structure of the entire industry is still focused around having to get that from a very specific demographic, which in a lot of ways undermines what public media is supposed to be. There's a lot of smaller community stations out there that try to do more of a job of just focusing on engaging with different organizations in the community, people in the community, getting their programming on there. And I think if NPR and PBS, they do a lot of this, and I think the future will mean they'll have to do a lot more of it, since the way funding works is basically from 1967. So I did my research project about that, mostly because I currently work for a couple of those places. And at the radio station, I decided to pursue my creative project. So I do a lot of editing there about dialogue, and it's a lot of work. It's really tedious. And while I'm doing it, I decided that it would be fun to incorporate the skills I do with that. So I record a lot of PSAs, a lot of event promos. Friends like Christy the Wordsmith, I'm like one of the assistant people. So I get to learn all that. It would be fun to apply that to my own creative project. So I made this podcast I called Montana Mysteries. So the premise of it, it's kind of like This American Life, but it's not really founded in reality. I bring these guests in. I have a mystery for them, such as highways and hats and rivers. So things that aren't really mysteries, but like just presented like it's a mystery. I have faux historical events that I discuss. I have this cool music that I made that's really cool. That worked. So I think it's mostly supposed to be funny. It's kind of presented like journalism, but it's not really. So I'm excited to present that. I have a 5-minute and 11-second promo for you to listen to. But before I do that, I'd like to thank all of my teachers here at MSU. They've all been great in just helping me figure out where I want to go as a student, as an educator, as a career person, worker, one might say. There's a lot of career opportunities I just didn't consider before school, such as like digging into synthesis, sound design, composition, and I mean broadcasting. I didn't know they still existed, so that's cool that I got to work there. It's very exciting for me. I'd also like to thank my family and friends that helped me stay in school and keep a positive outlook, even if things around me sometimes are negative, just to turn that into positivity and stay calm. And also, I'd like to thank my parents for encouraging me to pursue my interests no matter what, even if it's getting a music degree. I'm really thankful they didn't shun me for that, so thank you. Here's My project is the speaker on. Okay. Wait 7 seconds. It's going to the interface.
Montana Mysteries. Hello, my name's Drake, and I'm here to solve some of the greatest mysteries here in Montana. On this program, you'll hear from lots of locals about things that matter, like rivers.
I think a part of being a high-value female is everyone's below me.
Interesting. Do you think about whether or not there is a river there?
Every time. Every time. Every time. Because where will I get my water? You know?
Yeah.
And that concerns me.
I don't really like rivers all that much. They kind of irritate me. Do rivers go somewhere? I thought
Yes.
they were kind of just there. They ran in circles.
They go somewhere.
Whoa.
I haven't figured out where yet.
Maybe
Do you know?
No, it's a mystery.
Highways? Are you scared of ice?
I am scared of ice.
What about while you're driving?
Not so much when I'm driving, surprisingly. When you're driving, you're going so fast, the ice can't catch up to you.
Are computers scared of ice?
They should be.
Okay.
Tell you what, I read the Bible once. All right, I read the Bible once. I can't remember exactly which book talks about the rapture. Now, the rapture is inevitable. All right, but there's a few things that we can do to catalyze it, such as laughing in the face of God. I feel like that's one thing to go ahead and have great Almighty God come down and choose His chosen ones to come up and help him fight his battle.
So you take a more spiritual stance on us using the highway?
I don't know if I call it spiritual as much as I call it scripture and truth.
And even hats. How do bald people wearing hats impact you personally?
It scares me a little bit.
Okay.
You know, it makes me. I feel like I don't know what their next move would be. You know, like I don't. It's hard because it's unpredictable. It's like, do they have hair under there? Is it like just like a little circle in the middle, alfalfa style, like one that just sticks up? I just don't really know. And so when they're wearing a hat, I'm like, can I trust them?
Because it is like when you put on this hat, it turns you into a different person. Because I've had people, you know, when I'm wearing like a cowboy hat, that they greet me and they're like, oh, yeehaw. And then I'm wearing the flat cap and they're like, oh, where's my newspaper, you know? And I just think that there's a lot to be explored there.
You'll also hear previously unknown historic Montana stories, such as the story of Cold Eye Stevens. We travel to the Madison River Valley, Pony, Montana, circa 1890s. Ranching and cowboy culture prevailed in the region and horses were everywhere. Meet Buck Cold Eye Stevens, famous cowhand and user of special hat abilities. Legend has it that Stevens found 67 wild horses trapped up in a canyon one hot summer day. And as a man who never passed up a horse-saving opportunity, Cold Eye quickly decided to use his ranching hat in a display of horse heroism. Throwing his hat down the deep crevasse, a large gateway appeared with Cold Eye beckoning all 67 horses to enter. This gateway led to Stevens' ranch 3 miles to the east, where all of the horses found a proper home. Unfortunately, because Stevens used these abilities, which at the time were outlawed in the area, he was sentenced to 3 days in the county jail. Even so, his efforts led to the professional careers of 67 wild horses, all of which became prominent leaders in Montana's historic horse council. The advent of the train. At least 100 years ago, a group of river creatures decided to build tracks next to major rivers, and we, as the unhinged people we are, decided to put giant metal cars called trains on the tracks. We were able to count rivers while on these trains since they drove themselves. Unfortunately, these trains only followed one river at a time, which led to the invention of the telephone, so that we could communicate with other train riders about which river they were on. And creative climbing products. Interestingly, climbing grease originates right here in central Montana. It was 1936, in the midst of the Great Depression, a time where innovation was a last resort for down-and-out citizens to eke out a meager living. It was in this year that Gregory Grease invented his famous product, climbing grease. Bearing his name, Gregory Grease's climbing grease helped to spice up the lives of mountain workers. Throughout the various civilian conservation corps projects in Montana's mountain ranges, boredom prevailed through the camps. Since many of the workers were overly skilled climbers, they found scaling the various slopes around their work sites a bit dull. Their skill outweighed what the mountains here had to offer. This is where climbing grease came into the picture. With the help of this product, hands and feet slipped off of rock faces, leading to an increased challenge and fatality rate. While this would be seen as a brutal act in our time, the workers of the 1930s appreciated the higher stakes that the grease brought and promoted the product to national attention. All this on Montana Mysteries, available wherever podcasts are found.
Iron ore dust kind of filtering up into the sky.
I mean, honestly, I have quite a few DUIs, so I'm banned from getting my CDL, but I mean, I always want to be a trucker.
everyone. Thanks for coming out. My name is Kif Landek. I am a senior, but for those of you who wish now to disappear, too bad. One more semester. I had a very different capstone coming out more recently than what started. In March, I had the opportunity with Caleb Heineman to go to San Francisco to the Game Developers Conference. And there I met a ton of people, talked to all sorts of professionals doing things that I didn't know at all, or even processes that were conceived of yet, much less streamlined. But it basically told me something about what made games so interesting to me in the first place. And immediately I had to be part of it. So I chose the hardest one that everyone agreed on was the hardest thing to do immediately for my capstone, because I have very little self-respect. So today I'll be talking about how you change passive sounds to interactive or dynamic sounds. This will be through the lens of vehicle audio. What I mean by passive sounds, these are sounds that can't really change unless you're manually editing them. So for instance, a vehicle accelerating from 0 to 60 miles an hour, if you record that and then play it back, it's going to happen at a set rate. Yes, you can add a little bit of speeding it up and slowing it down, but usually players call this bad audio most of the time. It's very easy to hear. So how do you get this to a game where the player accelerates at their own rates? For games like Forza, any game like Forza, where they use realistic audio completely tailored after actual engines and real recording sessions. This is a very, very challenging task that normally costs millions of dollars, including renting out airstrips and all the nicest new cars and basically strapping about 40 mics to each individual car and getting 3 hours on each car from a very talented driver. For me, I don't have that, but I do have this guy. This is my best friend's, one of my best friends, Josh Zubek, who has a 1990 Mazda Miata, which he completely converted the engine, or took out the engine for a 2001 Corvette Z06 motor. Essentially, he took this old car that was doing pretty all right. You could hear it try to accelerate, to give it a 386 horsepower engine, which now his new speed limit is no longer the engine, but the plastic on his car that will shred itself off by air resistance. So the process of what I did to try to get audio, since we're focusing on pre-integration, integrating is the actual part of taking this passive audio and making it interactive. But how do you prepare for that? What do you do for these? Well, the first thing you need to do is develop a system, which is not something I appreciated before my first test drive, and greatly appreciated after, and as the project continued, more and more. So developing a very great organizational system, which includes file naming, which is also very underrated. You think it's just going to kind of come naturally to you, and then you're 600 files deep and don't know where you are. The recording process, the second stage, that's the most fun part. That's where you actually get to drive around in the car and occasionally ruin recordings by screaming. But we don't talk about those ones. Mixing and processing, which is the actual part of developing it into a usable file. The processing is the most part. Is most of the work, since mixing, I do a few separate mixes for each session, and once I have an area that I like on all the sounds, I can go through and tweak individual sounds, but mostly it's just processing and exporting hundreds of files from each session. I have a brief demo at the end. So how do you develop a system? Well, the first thing I did is went to Excel and wrote down everything, and I wrote down a little too much. I also experimented with other programs, graphic organizers like Milanote, which I used up the free amount very fast. So I quickly stopped using Milanote because of its limitations there. These are some of the, here's 2 screenshots of my very first test file, and then some driver instructions and other such. Very quickly with my test file, I was expecting to have to fully process and export 1,361 files for this library. I don't hate myself that much, so I dropped that number. We are at 638 files because I still like doing things harder than they should be. How do I get that from 9 actual recorded files. Most of these are different mixes. For instance, I have 2 separate interior mixes that basically capture 2 vibes of the cabin in the car, and several different positions outside the car. So for each sound, say turning on your headlights, I have about 6 separate scenarios, in which case that happens exactly the same way, but they all sound a little different. And that's how it quickly multiplies. So in this organization process, in those documents, I have developed name conventions, a very advanced file hierarchy, which is mostly just where do I put folders in my main folder, as well as a completely new way of thinking about session management, which I have never actually processed before, and it's one of the reasons I ended up choosing Reaper as my digital audio workstation. And also, how do I track things? Throughout this process, as you saw there, I dropped the amount of files by more than half. So how do I track what I did? Everything there is important, because the moment I stop tracking it, I have about 400 odd files I don't know what to do with, and don't know where they are, and don't know what makes them different, and that has been the cause of lots of sleepless nights in this past month and a half. So for naming conventions, it's fairly simple. It took me a while to actually find one that works really well, but it's a fairly simple one. It changes depending on the content of what I'm naming. For instance, the top one there is the actual raw recorded file, exploded. So we record these files in polywaves, because each individual mixer that I recorded with records in about either 4-channel or 12-channel polywaves, because it wants to only write one file. Once you explode that into individual channels, this is how I named them. I have the device named, the session it was from, the FS1 stands for the full session. I call them all full sessions after my first test session. What category is in, is it the car driving, which in this case both of these are the car driving. The action, which is, or the microphone location, which is in this case inside the intake hose, and it is the 4th channel in the polywave file, and then all that combined creates a system that is easy to search and get from any sort of file management system. Same thing with the end one, that is the actual exported files. These are the ones that are in the library right now in .wavs. That way I just have the general mix. In this case, I have an example for interior, my first of 2 interiors, and then my exterior left, which is just outside the car to the left. And then from there, same kind of deal. The session, the category, a subcategory for instance, engine start has the starter, the ignition, all of it together, and an idle. This is just the starter, and that's the region is just the selected portion of that category. So that works out very well. Once I got all the files planned out and organized, ready to be recorded in the first place, the recording, the best part happened. The first thing you know about recording is conditions actually do matter. My first recording, my test session, I checked out 60 items from our checkout system, which I believe is well over half of every item we have. This also happened to happen right before all the Film 259 multimedia audio design people needed them, because I was really making sure you check stuff out early. It's all a test. So I came in with way too much stuff. I came in with 21 separate microphones, all these different audio recorders, way too much. And then the night before I went out, it snowed, and we were out there in 34 degrees, and we set up for 3.5 hours before I drove to then drove for about 20 minutes to then tear down for another 2 hours. Wasn't a great time. Josh, as you can see, this is unhappy Josh, not a happy Josh. Luckily, our very next session, which held true with the next 2 as well, happened to be very happy Josh. We had wonderful weather. It was beautiful outside. It was quite warm, actually. It was very pleasant. And I knew not to bring every single microphone we have in the checkout system this time, which I'm sure was good, because it was also during other projects. This time I managed to limit myself to only 39 total items and 18 microphones. What I actually mic'd up was actually quite a lot, but these are the most important sections. I created a stereo image on the hood as well as, you can see that's the intake one. It is in the intake, which means if the foam that's keeping it from rattling around ever fell off, that car doesn't work anymore. So that was a very big nerve point. So there's a lot of duct tape where you can't see it, because duct tape solves everything. Most of this project is duct tape because also I put mics directly onto the body of the car and then proceeded to drive at 140 miles an hour, hoping nothing would happen to them, which nothing did. Haha. Thanks for trusting me, Dr. Antas. So it all worked out there. But as you see, I just literally have different microphones there. For one, I have an SM58, which tried and true. Just simply for the fact that out of all our microphones, it is one of the ones with the highest tolerance for sound pressure. So I can put it directly out of an exhaust and have the exhaust fire entirely, sometimes literally, at the microphone without destroying it, which is amazing because any of the other microphones would have just simply melted. So yeah, I put it on there, and this one I was able to get a good rush of air from the Shure SM58, and I got a ton of roar, and actually the most body of the entire car from the 4060, which was just a ton of literal, you'll hear, the only way to describe it is just the roar. This is not the hood, this is the cabin. But in the cabin, as you see, I went a little crazy. There are about every cable I could think of between the two chairs. Josh moved his chair forward and is unable to move it back because the sheer amount of cables we just stuffed behind it and called it a day. Cable management for scrubs, don't do it. Here we actually had the ambisonic microphone, which also, due for some file conventions, I had a drive crash, which happened right after. I'm not sure if you all know about it, but the cybersecurity attack, which stopped OneDrive backups from being a thing. So ambisonics are not part of the project anymore, but they were. So that we had a nice ambisonic microphone, which created an incredibly detailed image of the cabin, which I was very surprised to find was actually the clearest microphone I had on out of all the car, which is great. And then I had a shotgun mic pointing right at the shifter, so I get a little bit of shifting noise, but most importantly, I get some more roar from the engine, because the shifter is the weakest link in the cabin to the engine. I also had some external stations. I had two, one right where the car started, and one about a quarter mile down the track. You can just see it in that picture, which made it really funny when we reached about 5 seconds. I was very unused to that. But yeah, it was just very simple. I had one shotgun mic kind of pointed right about tire level, get a lot of the road noise and the whoosh of the wind, while the SE8, which is my own, which I use my own for, was on top and just picked up all the engine noise and the Doppler effect, which was by far the coolest. It's fun when you're waiting about a minute for this car, you hear in the distance roaring up, roaring up, roaring up, and it passes in less than a quarter of a second, and also blows out your speakers. It was a very, it's a great addition to different camera angles, for instance, in games. So how did I put all these together? Well, I use Reaper, as I said earlier, because of Reaper's batch file processing system. Being able to export and render all of these files at one time really quickly and have them named correctly. So, sometimes not, but that was other sleepless nights we don't need to talk about. They have them all named correctly, so I can have a library of 638 files just at the click of a button, which made life so easy. There's also the fact that Reaper is very light on system processing, so I was able to actually run these huge sessions with all these plugins and synthesizers and not crash my computer every time, which I had tried actually with Pro Tools and regretted miserably. So, well, as most people do when they try Pro Tools in general. So Reaper worked out quite well. It also has a great system of sub-sessions, which is actually what made this project entirely possible, because even with Reaper's massive amount of optimization, it still crashed on me my first few times. But sub-projects essentially let you place a separate session inside your main session, which is amazing. You can load things completely separately, and then it kind of does a fake, I say fake bounce, it calls it a realization, and then has that as an audio file inside the main session, so you can edit things individually. Made things a lot easier. especially since I went really heavy on some of my tools. As you see here, this is also a brief example of my file hierarchy system and why it's complicated. Each session has different individual things. For instance, different drives. On every day, I had about 8 separate drives. Each drive was a down and back on that quarter-mile strip. So in reality, it was 16 drives. And so every session is a 1 through 8 on the drives, and also a Foley session. Foley being just complete recording of every small little poke of a button. And under there, we go into gear 1. All the gear 1 sounds, including the clutch change at gear 1, and including the rev limit, which is a fun sound when you hear it sputtering. All the way to gear 2, and we actually could only get to gear 3 on his car unless we're going really slow because his car is a monster. And again, top speed is whatever the plastic can handle. And then you break down even further. So you have the low speed version of gear 1 and then the rev limiter of gear 1. And because of that, that's what made the file hierarchy hard is whenever I wanted to import a file, say it be a rev limiter, then I have 16 rev limiters 4 times, and I don't know what to do with them. And so I have, do I put them all in one file and call it rev limiters, or do I put it in all the drive files? And eventually I put it by session, because each session was a ever so slightly different mix. And so being able to put in session meant I kept consistency key. So here we can have a slight demonstration for what certain files will sound like. I'm preemptively turning that down. Cars are loud. Here we have a drive 1, which is my very first drive on the second day. It is just the first drive all the way through. Well, just the down all the way through, not the back. But we also have a loop I made out of that, which unfortunately, due to the integration of this, of Google Slides, does not work very well as a loop because it just pauses and just waits a hot 2 seconds or so after the song, or after the file, and then it loops, which makes it not a loop at all. But next I also have a little Foley example, which is the headlights popping up, because if you know anything about Miatas, one of the best features, and probably the only good feature about them, is they have these little headlights that go woo, woo, woo. You can make them go up and down, and they don't need to because they work when they're down, but why would you have them down when they can go up? And then some other shifting examples. So for instance, for the drive, here is my first interior mix. At this point, we had passed half a mile. And that continues on for a while, but to compare and contrast it a little bit, so you can see, since these are all from the exact same session, these are all the exact same session files, to compare that sound to of course, stuff like the headlights, which are also just fun to listen to, move around. Yeah, you just hear the wee. Downshift example. That's the downshift example. They're being able to chop them up into small parts really adds. And then for a brief 25-second clip of how this could be implemented in a way that's a little more dynamic. This is from Forza Motorsport. It is also a Miata. It is a 1996 Miata though, and it sounds incredibly different in the game, probably because it was recorded by these guys at Sounding Sweet. Sounding Sweet Incorporated, which is the people who did the talk at the GDC at the conference that inspired me to do this in the first place, who'd spend millions of dollars on this. but it sounds very different, but this is the completely replaced audio. It is a little harder considering the fact that it's easier to cut off a audio file early and switch it to the next gear than it is to try to extend your rev as it goes longer and longer and longer until finally you can switch to the next gear. And so this was an example of having the game having much longer revs than the files had, but still being able to stretch and being a little more adaptive and dynamic. They're copying me. That's all. Thank you so much. Thanks so much.
Hello. Hey everybody, my name's Isaac Weinmiller. I'm a graduating senior from the music tech program. For the past 3 or 4-ish years, I've been working as a full-time musician in Montana. I'm a multi-instrumentalist producer, performer, and a recording and touring artist. I kind of play in a lot of different bands around town, from bluegrass to jazz, country, Americana, indie music, and I also play in like bands that do like private events and weddings like that. So it's been fun kind of like diving into that around here. I tour with a couple different bands as well that are not based in Montana. One of them is called Vansire, in which I've got to do a handful of national tours. And that was kind of part of my research portion of this class, just surrounding touring and the mental health crisis that musicians are going through, or touring musicians, but I'm not here to talk about a ton of that. Anyway, in 2018, you can read more about all that stuff in the bio, in the program notes. But in 2018, I started releasing music under my name, Isaac Weinmiller, and in 2021, I came out with my debut album, Levels of Removal, which is right here, pressed to vinyl. If you guys want one, just find me after. Gotta plug it, I'm just trying to survive. But just come find me in the lobby or something. I got a lot of them left. So for the creative portion of this class, I was kind of looking to work on album number 2. So it was kind of like I was planning to make the album anyway, but I thought the capstone class would be a great opportunity to dive deeper into it and get feedback from peers and bring it into the studios here. I've been working on it since the fall. I've got about like 23, 22 minutes of finished material. Feeling pretty good about it. This project for me, it's just always kind of just been a way to feel into like harder emotions that I can't really understand myself, and just make sense of like emotions and feelings, thoughts and ideas that I can't articulate in any other way. So I do it to survive, but also I think if I can feel something from it, maybe you could too. So I'm gonna play 3 of those tracks for you guys today. The second album should be coming out sometime this next fall. Also, I wanted to give a quick thank you to my family for supporting me and following my dreams and whatnot, and getting a music degree, and friends, and most importantly, all the staff here in the music building. I love all you so much, and there's so much love in this building, and I've been here for 6 years, so it's kind of a sad to leave, but I really appreciate all of you and all my peers too. Love all you guys. So please enjoy these 3 tunes off my next album.
Hold on to people yourself deeply within. You've got everything that you need now. It's in your heart, it's yours, just let it in. Hold all the people that love you. Trust yourself deeply within. You've got everything that you need now. It's in your heart, it's yours, just let it in. I'm scared.